Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Perspectives on Educational Inclusion in the AI Era, Emerging Frameworks from Latin America and the Caribbean. In the name of the Regional Office of UNESCO Santiago and the IIEP, UNESCO Latin America and the Caribbean, we'd like to thank you for being with us in this exchange space. This is part of the Regional Alliance for the Transformation in Education, RT, and in the project Developing Digital Talent. These initiatives aim at strengthening the capabilities of educational systems to advance in digital transformations that can support inclusion, equity, and equality. Our first question is very urgent. How can we ensure digital transformation, particularly AI, can widely expand rights instead of deepening the inequalities that have been around for years? Talking about educational inclusion today is more than talking about just isolated responses. It means transforming policies, curriculums, practices, teacher training, participation in communities, and governance in technologies. Under this point of view, diversity is not a problem to be managed, but an opportunity to enrich learnings, to strengthen democratic living, and to build educational systems that can respond to all of the needs of everyone's. Today, we're going to have a conversation with very important people that will help us think about these challenges under different standpoints, talking about the evidence, data, accessibility, innovation, and the institutional conditions that are necessary for AI to be in service of the right to education. So let's start our journey today. And to open this event, I'd like to invite Valtencir Mendes, who's the head of education at UNESCO Santiago, who will contextualize the discussion that we're going to have today. Valtencir, the floor is yours. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Amparo. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you to the interpreting team that's helping us with the 3 languages. And I'd like to start by thanking you for being here. I'd like to greet our panelists here. We have Javier Gonzalez, who is the director of SUMA, Fiorella Heim, who's the president of the Council of CEPAL, which is an interesting experience that we all have. We're very proud of. And my colleague, Geronima Sandina, who's an expert in inclusion in education here at UNESCO. I'd also like to extend my warm regards to the delegates of the 33 ministries of education that have been following this with us and are here today, and who have been taking part in this diploma that we have developed, Digital Talent for Transformation and Innovation in Education, that we have done together with our colleagues from IIEP in Buenos Aires, who would like to thank very much as well. And also my colleagues at this office at UNESCO. So thank you so much for all of you. Welcome to this regional space that invites us to discuss one of the questions that we think is one of the most important in our in our agenda. How can we make sure that this digital transformation that is so promising sometimes can actually reach those that really need it the most? That it's not just another tool to deepen the crisis that we already go through. And all of this in a region that actually has deep inequalities. According to CEPAL, we're talking about the most unequal region in the world, where most of over half of the students are not actually acquiring minimal competences. We also have a large number of students that evade school. We have complex realities and complex learning results. And the latest UNESCO report on results, we see this great challenge that we still haven't been able to overcome, which is that 1 out of 6 children is excluded, is leaving education. Only 2 out of 3 students finish secondary high school education. If we look at our region particularly, we see that over 9 million young people are leaving school before concluding. So we're asking ourselves, how can this digital transformation actually improve these numbers, improve these learnings of those who are in school and these opportunities so they don't leave school before concluding and they can be citizens that are learning throughout their lives? We also want to bring this question in contact with the challenges of these technologies. We know that this digital revolution has brought great expanding opportunities. We see university courses, we see a lot of participation, but we see that it's also very difficult to overcome the inequalities in the access to the infrastructure, to internet, to the devices, but also these capabilities, the digital literacy, the mediatic and information literacy. We see these are competences that we still need to develop. And this has become very evident through the pandemic. I don't have to bring the numbers, but we remember perfectly of those images of our children climbing on top of trees to try to get connection. So when we talk about these things, we have to have this context of our region in mind. And the UNESCO report itself reminds us that of something that is often forgotten in this hype for the ed tech, which is the digitalization of education might benefit those that are already ahead. And this is something that those who are actually having access are the ones that already had access, and the others are still marginalized and still cannot reach this transformation world. And this tension is in the heart of our debate today when we think about what inclusion means. And this is what we want to talk about with these fantastic panelists that are here today and that are getting into the room right now. So to think of how we've reached this place, to reach this webinar. This space today is part of this process of UNESCO, of this office in collaboration with the IIEP to work within this alliance that we have for the transformation and educational innovation, which we call RT, which is a platform of multilateral cooperation that articulates education ministries, partners, international organs, and we have designed this formative itinerary that we think that will strengthen these capabilities for the technical teams that are designing, implementing, and evaluating digital public policies and connected to education. Last year, we finished the first phase, and we also had this amazing meeting in Uruguay with many of the participants of the courses who were working on their final projects. So we have finished this first phase, which was a general cycle of training for all of these people in education in the region, and we were able to work together for several months, building a common language. We have analyzed regulations. We have developed projects that were very much applicable to their context. And this cycle has created a precedent for what we are proposing now, which is the second phase. And what is this cycle of that we're talking about, and why is it important today? This cycle aims at deepening or doing a deep dive and going back to elements that we have already worked on, but focusing on something else. So it's not just building a general framework, because we have done that, but now we want to ground this and go from the analysis to concrete proposals and looking at elements such as digital governance. So we have Javier here from our colleagues that have been talking about this, but also elements like infrastructure, data management, and of course, the main topic, which is artificial intelligence. All of these elements alone have no use, but when we work them as something together, we see them as infrastructure, as something that can actually contribute for tools that should work within a perspective of inclusion as a human right, and so that we can have our right to education. And this means bringing into the debate some dimensions that are not always part of it. So what do we understand as inclusion? And we're going to have Javier from SUMA and people who have worked in previous reports from the UNESCO. But we also want to today talk about aspects of the world, people with disabilities, gender, interculturality, multilingualism, mobility. And this means disaggregating data that the system sometimes cannot work with. So we have to design and analyze risk and design proposals that are viable. And this, I would also like to highlight some topics that we have been working on, like the Network for Educational Inclusion, and that UNESCO has invited within this network that is dedicated for disabled students. We have invited schools in our region a few months ago to share these experiences, these innovation experiences for the inclusion of students with disabilities. And we have selected the best initiatives who are actually now going through a mentorship process. And these initiatives today are a community of learning, a learning community dedicated to innovation and inclusion, and to reflect about all of the knowledge projects that come from this community are very important to be shared. And there is still more to be done. So we're announcing that in the second semester of this initiative, will be celebrating its 21st cooperation journey, and will be dedicated to inclusive technologies and the use of AI to overcome these barriers that we have in our environments for these people, students and children who are disabled. So these 19 countries that are part of this network will be working on this, and this connects directly to this initiative today. And as you see, this webinar is part of a series of actions, and this is very important for us at UNESCO to coordinate initiatives that we can strengthen our solutions also. And this also has to do with a new initiative from UNESCO, which is the Observatory on AI on education for the whole region, Latin America and the Caribbean, that we have launched a few weeks ago. So this is a place to generate even more evidence because we need more data, more research, and we need to have more contextualized elements in our countries. So we have to gain evidence, strengthen the capacities of policymakers, teachers, students about what it means to use AI under this perspective of inclusion, and also following up on the educational system so they can navigate all of this digital transformation. So these elements that we're going to see today are very much related to the network, to the observatory, and other initiatives from UNESCO and other partners that are here with us today. So to start this debate, what can we expect from this webinar? We expect this to be an exchange of knowledge, of learnings, of active listening. And we also want the voices of this panel and the experiences that come out of this rich region that we live in. We want for the works of these participants, the formative itinerary and the critical analysis that we do today can actually become inputs for the work of people who make decisions in policy making. I think this can generate more impact. And at the end of this session, we want each participant to be more aware of their own context and maybe have new references even, hopefully, and can also have another interlocutor with whom to work with and to build with, because there are many very new elements here, and we have to all learn about this. Well, this is what we have been doing in the region with all of this work that we have been presenting here. And today we have this panel with these very committed voices in our region, and we invite you to listen to them actively and to take out something that can actually help in this educational transformation that we all look for. Because this is not about technology. This is about transforming education to reach the results that we so much want to reach. Thank you so much and have a wonderful workshop. Thank you, Val. And after what you've just said, we're going to organize this conversation. The idea is not so much to have isolated presentations, but to try to build together a reflection about educational inclusion and AI. And on each part, each stage, we're going to start with a question. Because we should not be talking about isolated responses, but then we're going to be talking about inclusion as a multidimensional phenomenon, and then we're going to understand which conditions are required for AI to contribute to the rights and not to deepen inequalities. We have Jerônima Sandino Ceballos, who is the coordinator of the Ibero-American Network of Inclusive Education, who will help us think about inclusion from the standpoint of rights. Javier Gonzalez, who's the director of SUMA, who will bring his outlook on evidence, research, and in educational innovation. And Fiorella Heim, the president of the management of SEIBAL, who is going to share their learnings about a public policy that has been sustained for a long time. Amparo and I will be taking turns in moderating this discussion. In each block, we will have a 5-minute intervention and then a reaction from someone else and a closing argument of the person who started. Amparo, now you can start our first block. Thank you so much, Fernando. Our first block is inclusion by design, accessibility, diversity, and rights around AI. In this block, we will have Jerônima Sandino and Fiorella Heim with the goal of talking about educational inclusion not as a parallel mode of work or a number of adaptations, but a transformation of the educational system. So AI must come as a central tension. AI can contribute to overcome barriers or to generate support and then widen, expand accessibility, but it can also produce new ways of stigmatizing people or excluding people if it's not designed with the outlook of rights participation and without human supervision. Hieronymus, I'd like to start with a question. Educational inclusion has often been approached with very compensatory measures or aimed at certain groups. But we have to think about it as a process of transformation. And the linguistic diversity, territorial, social, this should not be a problem to be managed, but an opportunity to democratize and increase the learnings for everyone. In the AI era, what does it mean to change the educational systems to respond to this diversity? And how can we avoid that AI and technologies become new, fragmented responses instead of contributing to remove structural gaps? So this is the question. Fiorella will then comment, and we will go back from you to hearing from you. Thank you and welcome, Geronimo. Thank you, Amparo and colleagues, for this invitation. As some of you know, talking about inclusion and digital transformation, innovation, and AI, these are all topics that I'm very passionate about, and topics that are not always together, and that not always are topics of conversation. This question or these questions, it's difficult to answer in 5 minutes, but let's try to do this. So to begin, I'd like to say that inclusive education is a process that is ever changing, that is trying to transform itself and to transform the educational systems to ensure the right to education for everyone from the first childhood and throughout life. It's important to understand that each student is important and equally important. This is what inclusion is about. And this is not an easy task. Inclusion requires transformation, a change in paradigm, both in the philosophy and in the practice of education. We have to move away from a unique one-size-fits-all solution. We cannot think about inclusion as an added component to education. This change of paradigm must make us see makes us see inclusion as an essential condition for the legitimacy and the quality of education, and an education that can respond to the challenges that we have, such as AI today. Over the past few decades, we have been more aware about an inclusive education, and this has reduced gaps. But we do know, and we're going to be talking to our colleagues about that, about data, that we still have a long way to go. Even though we have had more access, there are still visible and invisible barriers for us to reach the Sustained Development Goal number 4, which is an education that is inclusive and for all people. Inclusive education aims at generating opportunities for all people with practical approaches and adaptable contents that respond to different students, including disabled people. So, as I said, we have to think about the transformation of educational systems to more inclusive systems, but we also have to think about the students' ability to stay in the system. But I'm not talking about only physical access to the spaces. We also have to overcome all of the barriers for learning. Uh, there's a report in the actualization in the update of DUA 3.0. We say that we have to we create access when the design of the materials, which includes technologies and the experience, can be reached by all students. That being said, I'd like for us to reflect on how we can better use technology, including AI, to eliminate barriers in our students' learning experiences. And how would that be? For some students, that might mean using a dictator tool or a function of writing out. Others could be predictive text in a cell phone when answering an activity. There are several individual examples. All of these are examples of what we talk about, what we mean when we talk about digital or inclusive technologies, which reduce or eliminate barriers in the learning experiences, which is very important because sometimes when people think about inclusive education, they're thinking about inclusive technology, they're thinking about special education. But actually, it means to generate opportunities for all. And this is what we want to happen in regular classrooms where you have students that are disabled, students that are not disabled, migrant, native people, students. So it doesn't matter where the learning is going through. Even in schools that are in hospitals, the use of technology generates empowerment and a sense of belonging for many people. And this sense of belonging is very important. I'm about to end. In November last year, in the first Ibero-American Forum for Inclusion in Education, we had Sergio Cabez, who is specialized in user experience, and he made us think about the use of artificial intelligence for inclusive education, including AI, expanding human capabilities only when designed with ethical criteria, promoting accessibility for all. Another topic that he mentioned is that AI is not just a tool, it's a system that interprets the world, that generates images, texts, and it helps us, but it also decides which narratives go around with types of bodies, peoples, realities are shown or not, if they're distorted or if they're actually realistically shown. And this has very severe implications in education and public policies, both as well as in people's rights. We must take into account that this tool could better people's lives, but also could create difficulties. Just to end, when we talk about the positive potential of AI, we're not talking about a faraway future, but the opportunities that are already available to be used for educational and social inclusion. AI can help increase accessibility. It can generate texts, image descriptions, materials in seconds. This does not replace the human support of teachers, of families, of the people who are constantly in relation with each other, but it can eliminate barriers, particularly in terms of times, and it allows for personalizing, customization of certain issues, maybe simplifying content and proposing activities according to each student's thing that is crucial, which is the human relation. the relation of the teachers with the students around. Now I'm going to give the floor back to Amparo for us to continue with this discussion. Thank you so much, Geronima, for taking us directly to very, very concrete examples of when the artificial intelligence can help inclusion and when not. Now I'd like to invite Fiorella to comment, and then we'll go back to you. We have had the experience of working with UNICEF in a project for digital books that are inclusive and accessible using AI tools, just as Geronima was saying. And to make use of the potential of these tools of all children in a classroom. But we have seen that oftentimes the digital systems are sometimes designed and then adapted. And some of the offers that are around there. So part of my question would be, what would be the minimum criteria that should be present in designing a platform? For example, if you work with criteria like the UNICEF has regarding what is necessary when designing digital tools. And on the second part, in terms of the programs that are executed using technology. In Uruguay and in some regions, we do have very, very strong gender gaps in terms of technology and the STEM in general, but particularly in math, engineering, technology, more than science. And part of what we have seen and reduce or increase the gender gap. So my question is, what are the criteria that we have to be in mind when we design tools or programs with technology? Thank you so much. And now let's hear from Geronimo again. Thank you so much, Fiorella. I'd like to mention before talking about the criteria of what you mentioned about digital text, inclusive texts. We were able to use it with UNICEF in the forum in Bolivia. Alejandro Detamoso was able to present this experience, and it was wonderful. I think this type of experience of how to turn PDFs into very inclusive texts, including sign languages and having access to open data. I think all of this are experiences that we should also generate exchange about. And I also know that in Colombia, they're doing something with UNICEF as well. So the part of creating materials is also part of the inclusive technologies. And this is something that it's very important that you mentioned for us to be able to work with all of the countries. And about the elements, I think we have to keep in mind that the design of tools and tests and evaluations must be done with the participation of all of the people and the communities that will be worked with. So children and teenagers and young people who have disabilities, or those who are migrants, or who are of indigenous peoples, or the families as well. Because if they are not part of the design, it will be difficult for them to feel represented and to feel this sense of belonging regarding in the use of these tools. In our network DNA, we have seen initiatives in Colombia and the design of a STEM initiative that aims at working with diversity in total. So they're working with indigenous children, migrant children, children with disabilities, and in gender. So um, it's an area in Colombia where you can only reach by plane, and connectivity is very difficult. So the conditions are not ideal, but the best is being done. So regarding the conditions, I think both the design of tools and of the programs should take into account those who will take part of it. Secondly, they all have to take into account the algorithms and its biases. So AI is going to reproduce all of the imbalancing that there is in the world. And thirdly, in terms of disabilities and of indigenous peoples or ethnic minorities, it's the invisibility that these people go through. So certain bodies or cultures or realities are not present in the data. So the artificial intelligence doesn't know how to represent them. And what is not represented does not exist for the system we're going through. So you lose the narrative, but you also uh, create barriers and invisibility. Thank you so much, Geronima and Fiorella. I think this first block uh, brings this the central idea that inclusion is not just about a tool, but it's the capability of the system to identify and reduce barriers. So now we go to the second block. So if inequalities are very, we need to see these intersections when we talk about particularly AI, because AI could help recognize exclusion patterns, but it can also make people invisible who are not represented by the data. So now let's go to Javier. Um, Talking about educational inclusion and innovation, what type of evidence do we need to understand these things? So how can we avoid that aggregated data or incomplete or biased data make people invisible and these people who actually need more help? Thank you so much, Fernando. Thank you so much, UNESCO, for this um, space, which I think is crucial because, as Valtencier and someone else was saying, this is a space for us, for the Latin Americans, where we can see, we can meet people that we know, people from ministries I have worked with in the region. So, first of all, I'd like to highlight this space as even though it's large, it's a lot of people, it's still an intimate space. So congratulations, IIP and UNESCO for this. And also this gives us the possibility to talk about something that is very important, a topic that requires much more a very deep discussion. And with an outlook that I really appreciate with this work of UNESCO through all of the work that you have been working here in Latin America and in Paris as well, which is a critical outlook, which is taking this topic as seriously as and importantly as it actually is. And this doesn't mean to be against technology. Uh, Society can only advance through knowledge, science, and innovation. We have to be always open to see where this technology can be better used, but we can also we cannot be naive and just believe all of the different fads and the economic pressure, because this has to be said, the pressure the large ed tech companies that come to the governments offering all sorts of resources that sometimes some countries end up accepting because they don't see alternatives, but without having the capacity to actually regulate and have governance on these platforms. So we cannot be very reactively pessimistic. But thank you for the question about evidence. And I'm basing this in two studies that show the risks of AI. So today, before the GEM report that was published about, say, about, but technology in general, but today regarding AI, there are more papers that talk about the risks than the benefits. I don't want to go into extremes, but we do have to be able to talk about it without being considered like that we're trying to be just against technology. So, what I think is that it's important to have this caution regarding this topic. And I want to talk about two things before I move on to exclusions and inequalities, which is the core of this discussion, because this minority is actually the majority when we just sum all of the inequalities. So we see that AI has a problem in the learning and the uploading. So there's a delegation of certain key cognitive processes that we are seeing for the first time ever since this has been measured, that intelligence, we're seeing that new generations are having lower IQ. I don't want to go into the type of measurement and all of the academic discussion about that, but this is something to be aware of. So we see that our youth is losing some cognitive processes. There is also psychopathing, I believe, which is to which extent different platforms can foment social behaviors, because inclusion, and this is what we wrote in the report that we did with SUMA and UNESCO in 2020, inclusion is not only about acknowledging differences and valuing them, it's also building upon them. And in Latin America, we can actually recognize them or acknowledge them very much. We are starting to value them, but as a system, as a society, it's still difficult. And as teachers and schools, it's still difficult to build upon these differences. But for this, we need certain ethical frameworks, and that the AI seems to be going against. So there are studies from Stanford, from Harvard, that show that we have seen AI advising children to take their own lives. These are extreme cases, but they have been, they exist. So AI has a potential large benefit, and we will talk about that, but it's also very important to keep our our attention on the risks that are very tangible. And we cannot just embrace this without reflecting. So I just like to end saying that this is a very important place. We have been working at SUMA with inclusion. We know that inequalities in Latin America is multi-factor, multi-dimensional. There is an intersection that is very difficult makes it very difficult to approach this, but there's no way out. The system, so our first principle is about social justice before efficiency. And this is also in the AI systems. So they are built today to optimize efficiency, not necessarily equity or justice. So just to very quickly, I'd like to mention a few topics. Of course, AI can increase opportunities for students that are excluded. There are important experiments in Brazil in terms of programs and tools such as subtitling, text to voice, voice to text. In Mexico, we have seen several pilot exercises in a linguistic field for ethnic minorities and linguistic adaptation, translation for students who are from migrant students. So the region has been moving towards this effective use of technology, and this is something to be celebrated. And there's the potential of the AI. Together with this, the support to teachers to cater for these diversities. We have to, and so teachers have not been trained for inclusion. So AI is a very potent, powerful tool to help these teachers and to approach this diversity. As it's a very large and complex topic, but I understand we have time frame. Thank you so much, Javier. Now we're going to invite Geronima to comment or react or ask a question to Javier's intervention. So let's just try to be brief so we can all speak. Yes, thank you so much, Javier. I think we start to see an interesting path in the meta-analysis, talking about risks, ethical frameworks, studies the potential and the risks, taking into account the need of social justice and how we can make use of the opportunities in education, which is the important focus here, and teachers. Within this framework, and since we're talking about inclusive education and AI, I'd like to ask you if you could go deeper into these studies that you have been doing, because sometimes disabled people or people who are excluded somehow, sometimes they are not reflected in information systems, they are invisible for some systems. So how do you think we could produce, or how have you dealt with all of these studies? How can we produce rigorous evidence without reinforcing an incomplete outlook over people? So how can we combine disaggregated data, participation under the approach of rights when we talk about AI and decision making in education? Javier, you have 2 minutes. Yes, important data. We have moved on and we have moved forward in the region in terms such as the census. In the 1980s, only 6 countries in Latin America asked about ethnic minorities. Today, almost all of them do. The questions of the Group of Washington are being very much implemented, even though 9 countries of our region still don't. So we have moved forward, but we still have a lot to do. But just to very quickly reply, first, I think we have to stop classifying people to classifying barriers. So not who has disabilities, but we have to ask, what are the barriers that you face? What kind of support do you need? What would help you? So this is something that we need to improve in our questionnaires. We also have to increase our capability of working with disaggregated data instead of rigid categories. So this intersectionality of the data. Third, I think we have to include not only a quantitative aspect, but also the voice of the people who are affected by such inequalities. So discriminations, talking about the belonging. So this will enrich our outlook of the data. And so this requires much more participation of the communities. Now, regarding how we operate in these systems, I think it's important, and I want to close by saying this. The AI design has to have a goal, an explicit goal to achieve equity or equality. And second, many people who are here are in ministries of education, so we have to have more capabilities to audit the algorithm to avoid the biases, introducing human supervision in relevant decisions. So we have to move forward towards data governance and more ethical frameworks of to use these experiences. So this would be my reply. Thank you so much. Thank you, Javier. Now I'm giving the floor to Amparo. Thank you so much. So now let's move on to the final part, in which we're going to have the participation of Fiorella Heim. And please, Fiorella. Yes, just hello. Perfect. Fiorella, for an educational system to be really inclusive, it's not enough to just incorporating technologies. It's important to have public policies focused on rights, disaggregated data, curriculum that is relevant, teacher training, accessibility, support technologies, access condition, and the participation of communities and families. With your experience at CEBAL as a digital public policy that has so many years running, what institutional conditions allow technology to really contribute for inclusion? And looking at the use of AI, what learnings are key to use it with criteria of equity, accessibility, and responsibility? Thank you so much. Thank you, Amparo. I think that's something that is key in the story of Plan Ceibal over these 19 years, over 5 different governments that maintain these public policy. It has to do with the institutionalization of this. Ceibal is an entity whose specific goal is the digital transformation in education, in public education, from 6 to 18 years of age. And the board where I'm the president, we have the Minister of Education and the Minister of someone from the Ministry of Finance. So when you have this institution as an innovation center that has such a clear goal, it allows us to create or to assign someone accountable who can actually do the Sudoku and make everything work. Because we sometimes see that responsibilities are diluted throughout different ministries. So one is in charge of connectivity, other is in charge of content, and the other is in charge of something else, and they're not working in alignment. So being able to tell a school or a group of teachers or a group of families that whenever they have any issue in integrating technology in education, they have one place to go to, and we can go and solve that problem. It's very, very valuable because at the end of the day, the person is not worried about if the problem was Wi-Fi, if the problem was the platform, if it was just they forgot a password, or if the device's memory is full. The problem is that they're not being able to use this educational tool. They cannot connect to the program. So the fact that they have an institutional entity that is responsible for this and that can provide answers to any of these aspects that make this educational program possible, which is not just handing out laptops or having Wi-Fi or doing tech support or training teachers. It's a global thing. It's something altogether integrated. So it's about talking about content, it's talking about the platforms, as Fernando was saying. I'd like to highlight here something that is crucial, particularly talking about artificial intelligence as a new technology, but it's a technology after all, which has to do with having our goals very clear. And I think that everyone, each of our countries has something has to have, their ministries have to have this idea of what are the important problems to be solved, and to define a strategy to implement programs and evaluate programs afterwards. So this is crucial. We often hear about general studies about tags or categories that are applied to very different designs. So, for example, we talk about screens, but you don't know if you're talking about digital libraries that can generate access to reading, or if you're talking about games, or if you're talking about social media. So there are very, very rigorous or very, very eloquent studies that are talking about a great diversity of situations. So I think it's very important to understand what's the case, what problem was identified, what the context was, what was the design that was used, what was the implementation that was done, and then you can have a study, an evaluation, or an assessment. This doesn't have to take decades. We can do very powerful studies or impact studies, experimental studies, and this can feed back and allow for adjustments all the time. Today, the tools that we have allow us, particularly in the data processing issue, to make better decisions, to better assess the options that we have. And I'd like to say, just to end, because I saw in the chat that someone was talking about developing basic competences in students. I think it's crucial right now in generative AI moments to generate in students, teachers, families, communities, this literacy in AI, this minimum literacy in terms of AI, in topics of AI. It's not something magic. How does this work? So in terms of this, the way it works, there are limitations, there are risks. So how can I use to make use of these opportunities? Thank you so much, Fiorella. It's very, very important to contextualize how important it is to have institutionality, governance, and the method for this institutionality. So now we'd invite Javier Gonzalez to comment. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you said. It's very interesting, Fiorella. The case of Sobral in Brazil, for example, is a very important example of bringing this of Ceibal. I'm sorry, not Sobral, Ceibal. It is a constantly developing exercise. The promise of technology as the ultimate driver of learning, even Ceibal is not like that, because sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. There are evidence of the adaptability or the adjustments that you're doing in math, for example, can improve a few cases, but still, regardless of that, there's still the issue that technology still has not shown how fully what it can do, both the older and the new technology. So how can we, in the countries, we have to decide when to start using technology, when to scale it up, and should I be looking at it as the Ministry of Education, as the responsible for technology? So after your experience, what would you think we have to take into account in these issues? Well, part of what you were saying has to do with what we measure and what we're trying to measure. I think for a long time, the industry of academic research and academic articles has not asked the right questions. I don't think there are studies on why it could be important for a school to have light and power and not just have candles for light, or seeing what the effects of that is in learning. So Wi-Fi is the same. You can have Wi-Fi as a technology in many schools, and that won't necessarily impact learning, but that's part of the infrastructure that is needed for the programs. And what is actually makes sense to ask is whether our programs that we're implementing using this infrastructure, which could be Wi-Fi, laptops, platforms, are they having results in what we want? So if we teach English through video calls, are the children learning English or not? If we use a platform system to teach math, the teachers that use these tools, are they actually managing to have their students break these gaps? So I think this is what we have to think. If we look at access of AI systems, this is not going to affect learning. But to give you an example, if we design a specific program to learn how to build argumentative texts for children who are 15 years so they can write an argumentative text. So we design together with the teachers a tool based on AI that can guide students through this. So we have been assessing in experimental design this tool to see if, when applied the way it should, with a pedagogic intention and not just a tool that is around there, if it does generate better capacities in these 15-year-olds that have to write texts in the written production. I hope to give you a response in a couple of months if it was worth it. In Ceibal, we did 11 specific studies about questions that we had, specific questions. And the key is measuring concrete things that we are interested in and things that can be achieved through technology, and then scaling up or not after this experience. Thank you so much, Fiorella and Javier, for your comment. And I think this block also leaves us with this very important idea that AI can open possibilities only when there is an institutional ecosystem that can guide, assess, sustain, and correct its use. That's why I believe this experience from Ceibal is key to inspire us in the region regarding where we're going. Well, we have gone over time. We're going to ask one final idea from each of you to close this panel, an idea that you want to leave us with, or you'd like for the people from the ministries who are here can take away. So Geronimo first, just a very, very short idea, less than 30 seconds, 10 seconds. Well, going back to what we were saying before, I think that my takeaway from here is that AI has to be participatory and centered on equity. So communities, both students and, well, children, people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, families, migrants, and that all of the data is represented as actually representative, prioritizing diversity, equity, and social justice. Javier. Thank you. I would say that the focus has to do with, in this stage of human history, where school is and is part of this present and future, we have to focus very much on the humanity and the human interaction in education. And the pedagogical core, it's our teachers who are going to make education more inclusive and all of the systems to support this pedagogical interaction. But if this is the focus is social justice and strengthening what's human, then we have to ask, how can we complement these actions with technology? And of course, there's room for it, but starting with this question, I have seen ministries in the region that are using a different approach, taking a different approach. They're prioritizing, we have to bring technology into this because this will generate votes, this will make it look like modern, this makes it look like we're doing things quicker than the others, and then we'll see how we can bring this into the curriculum and all. So we have to take care of our children, our students, with the idea of rights. We have to keep our cool and not just go into a very reactive action. I think the decision of which technologies to introduce needs a very ethical dimension. This is what I want to leave us with. Fiorella, your final thoughts. Well, very quickly, I want to reinforce the importance of AI literacy to make use of the opportunities that the AI can bring us for the several of the challenges that we face without leaving behind other important aspects. We have a manifesto for the introduction of education, AI in education. So AI literacy and opportunities are the most important ones. But we also talk about ethics, being human-centered, human responsibility, and I invite you to read this manifesto and the pedagogical framework that we have for the use of artificial intelligence in education, materials and publishings. You have it in our Ceibal website, and I think you can find many, many materials there. We have very, very short time. We could do a lot more, but I thank you for this space and for the opportunity to exchange ideas with the panelists. Thank you so much. We'd like to thank you, Val, Geronima, Javier, and Fiorella for helping us think about these challenges under these complementary outlooks. Now, those who are doing the diploma, the course, please keep in the room. The live transmission, the live broadcast will close, and those who are going to be in the session of the workshop that is part of the diploma will be taken to the breakout rooms. Thank you so much, and I give the floor to Amparo to close the meeting. Thank you so much, Fer. And I just to reinforce the idea that has been here through the meeting. AI does not define the future of education. This future will depend on political decisions, institutional and ethical decisions that we make as a region in each of the spaces where we contribute. And we have to keep building this collective knowledge in these collaborative spaces. Even though we're here in 33 countries, we're feel very much at home here. So thank you all, and we'll see you back again. See you soon.